And such time as we have Eva or Nellie, why we could talk about their experiences of girlhood.
We're only going to talk about the good ones, aren't we?
Oh, I suppose probably we could spread them a little more broadly. I came on the scene, by the way, the lamp over in the corner here, which we will not show, is the lamp from our house prior to the time that it was our old Latin lamp. And then the electricity, the Dad, in his inventive way, got a Delco light plant, 32 volt. And I came on the scene then just at the time that the old kitchen was being torn off of the house, and the new kitchen, the cistern, and that whole system, which provided water and also provided, well, we had central heat in the house, and had a large porch. I roller skated on the porch a lot. That was where I learned to roller skate. I don't guess you probably managed that one well.
Well, we had a coaster wagon, and that got pushed back and forth, and
very much. I think if I remember, I was the pusher and you were the pushee.
Well, and I learned to lean over and push it with my hand on the floor.
That's right. Yeah, you got
that's the
pretty
way
good
yeah.
That's
where I pedaled it.
Where I kicked with one foot, you used your hand to pedal it. One thing they said about me was that they didn't have any idea how many rocks I might have eaten, because I loved to, in the work site, when they were doing that building, they were always finding me with stones in my mouth. So that is beyond my memory. And one thing that I do not remember, which I noticed that you remember, is our grandparents, the ones that we've just noted, Grandpa and Grandma Klotz. They're just beyond my memory. But I do remember grandparents on the Milne side. So.
Well, and we haven't said anything about our grandparents on the Milne side either. And we do have, I have quite a lot written about them in my story. We've got more letters and that sort of thing. But I wasn't able to find so much over in Scotland, and so this was a particular interest right here on the Klotz side, finding these things way back in our European roots.
Yeah, we've been fortunate in finding the old letters, which go back to our great-grandfather when he was in Kingston, Ontario, still serving in the Queen's Army, I believe it was, as a tailor, and the folk in New York then inviting him to come down. Those are very, very interesting letters.
One thing I think about, you were mentioning about your being a baby at the time the house was being remodeled and some of these things. One thing that seems to come to my mind more as I've been digging into our family story is the tremendous load that our mother carried throughout the years. That is, maybe not all at one time, but I have a page in one of my notebooks in which I show a picture of Edwin. He was the first child, and then they had a picture of Edwin and Frederick together. Frederick was the second child. The next picture is a picture of our mother and father with Elmer. By now, Frederick had died. This was early in 1909.
Yes.
And then the next picture was a picture of Edwin and Elmer together. And then the next picture is a picture of Edwin and Nellie and Lloyd. Elmer died. And so it's to those of us who came later, these were just names. We knew that we had brothers that lived at that time. But I think it was difficult for us as children to realize something of what that meant to our parents. For two children to be taken at that time.
Within a very short span of time.
Now, of course, that was not the end of it. And now I came along, there came this bout
You
with
had
polio.
Polio, yeah, right.
And those were difficult days too, when we went through this process of tearing the old kitchen off the house and building on the new, and there was all the mud and the mess, and Alvin was a baby, and our mother had all of this sort of thing to deal with, and
I suppose probably I was not exactly, my birth was not exactly anticipated. It may be that the addition on the house was going to be the next major thing, and then sure enough,
I'm not sure any of us were just exactly anticipated, but that isn't the way necessarily it was done.
So the crowning glory, what we're saying, is of Mother's rather difficult years was in 1922 and when I was born.
Yeah. Well, I remember a number of things. He was a cute little brother, towhead.
By the way, Helen Ott Erickson, I saw her at Adolf's funeral. She was at the cemetery, and this is one of the comments that she made to me, telling me what a cute little boy I was and how they loved to cuddle me. And then something happened.
But then each of us had our jobs, and I remember one job that he didn't like was going out after the butter pail.
Yeah, really.
Now that doesn't sound like, that sounds very unfamiliar to many of them. But in those days we sold cream, and several of the neighbors took turns in coming by every morning, picking up the cream, taking it into town.
We take our turn too.
In our family, yes.
Which I like to do very much, to ride with Lloyd when he'd take the cream in.
If you were out of butter, we had a little gallon cans. I don't know whether
Just
you
plain
see
old
them anymore.
Carol syrup can, yeah. Yeah, right.
And we'd set that out by the cream can with a little slip in it, and at the butter factory they'd put in the amount of butter we'd asked for, and that'd be deducted from the check when my dad got it at the end of the month. And then it'd be set off with the empty can when they came back. I think Nellie has a picture of Alvin sitting on that little butter can like this.
Yes, right.
And not very happy because it was a hot summer day and he had to go out after the pail of butter. And he sat down on it and instead of bringing it in. But
that was, of course, pretty important that butter get in too, because it could get rancid pretty quick out in the hot sun. They generally didn't set it in the shade.
We had our pony Buster.
Oh, yes,
Cleo
Buster.
Matke had her to begin with. I don't know what was wrong with Cleo. It was a girl pony, but he called her Buster. And, but I don't know whether he had a girl name and he was a boy. But
That's right, yeah.
so I don't know. But anyhow, I remember our mother, on occasion or two, took the pony and buggy to go to school to get us from school. And I remember one day, Alvin was in the buggy, waiting, and Mother went to do something, and the pony started off. And he didn't know what to do. He says, "Go dit way, Buster. Go dit way. Go dit way."
That was my introduction to horsemanship. Of course, I don't think that any one of us probably would qualify too highly in terms of the horsemanship that we developed with Buster. I remember one time I had problems getting on her, and without a saddle especially, and I was up on a wagon wheel and clambering up, and I somehow or another missed and went over the other side, landed on my head. Another time I was riding her, and we came in. Remember, we had the barn door going into the horse stall was a sliding door that slid back and forth. and somebody had left it open about a foot, something like that, and Buster saw that open door, and she wanted to be in the barn. Again, I was riding without a saddle, which was probably fortunate. Buster ended up in the barn, and I ended up on the outside.
You remember our school bus in those days?
Yeah, right.
Carrie Ellis was our school teacher for 3 years, at least my last 3 years in country school. And she came by our house, and so she stopped by to take us along. And my dad would fill up her gas tank every once in a while, and it seemed to be a good arrangement. She had an old Chevy Roadster, and so part of us would pile into the back end of that. We'd lift up the trunk
Turtle
lid. There was a turtle on the back, and we'd open that up, and part of us would load up back there, and part of us out in front. And about every morning, we'd be a little bit slow in getting ready, and Mother'd cry out to some of us, "Hurry up and get ready, Carrie Bell will soon be here." And, that was a familiar strain.
Yeah, I remember that. Being small, I sat in the front seat, and I got my first kiss there.
I remember that, right on the nose.
Ruby Del Grauman, yeah, for no special reason, just suddenly kissed me on the nose.
But she was pretty, and I wouldn't have minded
right.
that.
Yeah. Well, I think as I recall, in my high school days, of course they moved away, but I met her and was able to return the favor. That was important that be done. That one picture that you have of the school group, that must have been probably about the height of the size of the school. One-room country school. I believe, if I remember correctly, there were 24.
I think 27.
27
at the height.
At the height. Yeah, there were 24 in the
picture,
picture, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing that you do recognize those folks. You know, you can't knock country school too much. I've always said that I didn't just have one shot at learning in country school. I had at least 7 different chances to learn my lessons, because probably I spent as much time listening to the recitations that were going on when the classes were up there as I did reading my own lessons.
Well, and I think we've had a habit of sort of knocking the country school, but when you had a good teacher, you had oftentimes a very good situation, more or less one-to-one sort of education. I have told many people many times that I learned most all of my English lessons, my grammar, and that sort of thing in the last 3 years of country school under Carrie Ellis.
Yeah.
And I think I know my English grammar, and I become very, I think I know it to the point that I oftentimes become critical or maybe obnoxious, but nevertheless, what I know I learned in the country school.
Yeah, of course, we should have had good teachers, because our father was president of the school board for, what, 20-some years. During the time his kids were in school, what, he was in a rather strategic position.
And he was anxious that the kids in that school got a good education. He was concerned about his kids, and I'm sure along with that the others. But I remember at the time that Carrie Bell was hired, other teachers were getting $60 a month, and they paid her $80. And there were a lot of them that thought that was terrible. And my dad took a lot of heat over that.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we had a good education.
You know, I always I reflect a good bit about Alf Valla,
Yes.
who was, of course, the county superintendent of schools. And there wasn't any one of the Klotz kids that beginning very, very early, that when he came to visit, and he was real good. It wasn't just exclusively the Clances, but he knew the children by their names, their first names.
He'd get us on that long recitation bench and have us recite, and he praised the whole gang up and down.
Yeah.
That was the finest group of boys in the whole county.
Yeah, he was an amazing person. I believe of Norwegian extraction. His nephew was a Borlaug who was responsible for the Green Revolution that was publicized about 15 years ago. So much. Well, in fact, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, as I recall.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a nephew of Alf Valla.
Oh, yeah. When I started the school, this may have been before you, yes, it would have been before you started. But the school had several steps leading up to a porch, and then the question was, well, how do I get up there? Well,
was that what we call the new school? At
the new school.
Which had been built when? Probably about in the early 20s.
Right, along in the 20s.
Mid-20s, maybe.
Mid-20s, probably, yeah. But one solution to it, Lloyd and Nellie were both in country school at that time. We had the Ford pickup. My dad would buy an old Ford touring car, and the custom then was to cut the back seat off and run the top down to the back of the front seat, and then you put a box on the back side, and then you had a pickup. They hadn't made pickups yet.
Actually,
but they were.
Was this the same one? He had a Roadster, I know, perhaps this is a later time, and every Saturday night it was a weekly event that Lloyd would take the box off, and he had the old Turtle.
Right. That was the second one.
Yeah. That was
the
got the idea in the first one, and yeah, Lloyd then did much of his early courting in a Roadster.
They put an eye bolt on each side and fix it so you just fasten the front end of the box down. You go down the road, the back end of the box bouncing up and down. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, it haul cream to town and worked very well as a pickup. And then for his courting car, he had the fancy, just a plain stubby Turtle with a lid that lifted up. Mm-hmm. And so that was what he used. Well, anyhow, one of the solutions to getting up the steps was to put a ramp up the steps to the north side and take a coaster wagon. And so they put cleats across the ramp, and then they only went through the middle, and then out beyond the cleats there was room for the wheels of the coaster wagon to run. So the kids could pull me up, or Lloyd and Nellie, particularly in that first year or so that I was in school. So they were to pull me up the ramp on this in the coaster wagon. Well, this was wonderful, but the kids found a lot of fun in taking the coaster wagon during recess, getting up on the porch and then shoving it and going down and seeing how far they could coast out into the yard. And it really gave the coaster wagon a workout and kind of bent it up and so on. And in the wintertime, it was an ideal spot. They'd take water and pour down the thing to make it icy, and then each one of them would bring a barrel stave or some slab of wood, preferably a thin piece, that they could put between their legs and sit down on it and put their feet in the tracks where the wheels went, and then sit down on the board, and it would go clattering over these cleats. And this was fun, just to go up there and slide down that and pick themselves up and run up the steps and go down again. Until eventually then I learned to back up the steps, or I'd throw my crutches up and somebody would take me by the feet and wheelbarrow me up the steps, and then they took the ramp away. But the kids had an awful lot of fun. It was more for the fun of the kids, I think, in the way it worked out, than for any real practical use to me.
interesting thing to me as I reflect back on the old one-room country school was the fact that at that time it seemed like a big place, plenty of space for, gee, when you think about 27 kids and a teacher in that place, it would have been pretty full. But then is one later in life, as you saw it and reflected upon all of this, pretty small. It wasn't much of a space there. Of course, we had the 2 outdoor toilets, and one time we were raking the leaves in fall, and somehow or another, I forget, I think Lenore Stagey was probably our teacher at that time. We were burning them, and by some means or another, the fire had worked its way over and burned down the girls' toilet. That was quite an event to see that disappear.
Our modern conveniences were really nothing when you think of today. We didn't even have electric lights, or we didn't even have running water. It was running water with the kids running up to the neighbors and getting it.
Go up to Judge's, and we had 2 granite coffee pots, or what we call granite. They were porcelain, and one slightly smaller than the other, and we would go and get that. And then once a month, we'd have to go up and get an extra load of water because we would make coffee for PTA. And you remember on PTA night when you'd go in, the smell of the kerosene lamps and the kerosene stove downstairs wherever they were making, and the smell of coffee. Once in a while one still strikes some kind of a nostalgic odor like that, and reminds one of it.
And at a time the Judges had a flock of sheep, and with it they usually had a rather ornery buck sheep. Mm-hmm. And as the kids would come and start out with a pail of water, he'd come and bunt them and knock them down and spill the water. They'd have to go back and get more.
Once their bull went berserk and came down through the fence, and so we had to scatter and go on back in the schoolhouse and stay there all afternoon until they got got him herded back where he was supposed to be.
It's amazing what things kids won't devise and think up. For quite some time we drove the pony and buggy to school. And I remember one day the kids got the idea, well, let's take the buggy up to the top of the hill there. It wasn't a big hill, but then there's quite a little slope from the Judge's driveway down to the school ground. And so they all got hold of the thing and pulled it up there, and we took the lines from the harness and fastened them onto the thills, and we'd hold them up, and we're going to guide it by that. So we got it up there on the road, and everybody got into the buggy, and we were going to guide it by pulling the lines on the thills up ahead. Well, we got started coasting down the hill, and you couldn't guide the thing, so we ran into the ditch. And I remember I lit on my head over in the ditch, and the rest of the kids landed everywhere. But we didn't wreck the buggy, but I don't know why.
You remember, used to have problems, there were 2 hills between our place and the school, and of course this was a problem during the winter of having to buck snowbanks. And Lloyd got to be quite proficient at bucking snowbanks with his Model A. The one thing I remember too was that in the spring when the frost would go out and the roads would go bad, even at the top of the hill, and especially along the side where there were spring water that tended to escape, they'd have to put planks on the road in order for you to be able to make it through. And any given spring, those county roads, there would be quite a few places where there were really bad spots. And in fact, you remember we're on Highway 18, right down close to our house. There was a place where they discovered that heavy equipment, which wasn't very heavy back in those days, well, the old steam engines would have...
It always it always broke up there.
Yeah,
It seemed
and
to be
what happened-
springs near the...
Well, what happened, what they found out later was that there was a tile drain that went under the road, and the heavy equipment had crushed those tile down, so that, yeah, we ended up with a real marshy spot in the road.
Going back and forth to school was an interesting thing. There was a period of time, perhaps, well, it surely must have been after, I suppose it was after Lloyd and Nellie started to high school, that my father and our neighbor, the Rickards, who lived a half-mile west of us, took turns. One would take us to school in the morning, and the other would get us in the evening. And particularly in the winter and in the spring. On winter mornings, when there was snow, the road would be plugged, so they'd take a team of horses with the bobsled. Now, it was cold, but there was something really fascinating about riding the sled to school, hearing the old sled creak and feeling it go up and down over those snowdrifts, and the horses pulling away at the thing. And as we get near the school, some of the kids, the older boys, would come and get on the runners, and when we'd go home, they'd jump on the runners again and go so far and jump off into a snow bank and then head on homeward. And in the springtime, when the roads broke up, as Alvin was saying, they took a high-wheeled wagon, a lumber wagon, as we called them. And I remember riding oftentimes with Ernie Rickard and his team of horses in the old lumber wagon.
When one thinks about all of the mud and the dust and the flies and all of that, one wonders whether the good old days were all that good. But yeah, there were certainly some compensations about it all, and yeah, riding in a sled and that type of thing was really a really nice experience. I remember we used to use the buggy and the pony too to go to church, especially during summer when we went to vacation Bible school. We'd go over to the church, and I always got the bad seat because the thing was full. Helen Ott went with us, and Eva and you, and I don't know how many. Anyway, I had to sit at your feet in that little.
There wasn't much room in it.
Yeah, down by the dash. I suppose the dashboard. And yeah, there wasn't too much room, and I would get pretty cramped up by the time we drove a little over two miles. Yeah, it was. The other thing, of course, we always think of, I suppose, when we talk about Buster, was her propensity for developing lameness. She would get lame, and that was always. Well, we were in thinking it through later on. We were not so sure that it's possible she was smarter than her operators on that point. But I remember one time we went over to Ott's, and well, Helen was with us at the time, and poor Buster started to limp.
Terribly.
Terribly, yeah. So we unhooked her from the thills of the buggy, and I believe we put you in the little luggage carrier in the back of the bus, and you held the reins, and Eva and Helen and I pulled the buggy, and we were going down Highway 18, heading for home, and people would come by and just laugh and laugh and laugh. And we couldn't figure out
what they were laughing about.
What they were laughing about. Here we were pulling the buggy, and here was the
We
horse.
should have had the pony up in the seat.
Yeah.
Couldn't get her there.
Yeah. Probably would have if she would have fit. Yeah, going to a one-room country school the fact that we went to a one-room country church, and every spring and fall there was the task of putting the two space heating stoves in the wood or coal burning stoves. And that was kind of a task too, because it required a big long Y of probably about a 6-inch stovepipe that had to be suspended from the ceiling. I think Edwin generally got that job, and he had it worked out to a pretty good science so that they could take the heating system in and out rather quickly.
Well, ultimately, he changed furnaces down at the hardware, and so he said he'd give them the old furnace, and so they dug a hole under the church and built put the furnace under there, which was really a great asset.
Also a big chore too, because they had to, in the process of digging a basement under the church building, they had to make sure that it was properly drained away from the church. And I remember having to dig a tile ditch that went all the way down to the county road, to the ditch there, so that it could drain that church basement.
But again, it's interesting to go back to those days and the way we did things and the conveniences we had or did not have. Musical instruments in the church were rather new when I was young. In fact, we'd had a period when there were no instruments in the church. I'm not sure whether we had an organ or a piano, but I remember yet coming together for Sunday school, the call to worship was oftentimes, "What shall we sing?" Mm-hmm. And I remember Maud Sharp yet with her tuning fork. Somebody'd give a number and she'd hit the tuning fork, and we'd sing a cappella. And I learned to sing in the church. I remember Frank Ditch used to have a rich, deep bass voice, and we had to sometimes kind of plan to sit behind him and then just feel the bench while he sang, because he'd make it vibrate, and it kind of made me want to sing bass.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, and just listening to him, I learned a little bit about the whole matter of singing bass to hymns, and it's interesting how you learn from being in the group that way.
Yeah, the interesting motivations that were involved for people in a small church like that. A couple of things that keep it in my mind. One was that in a small church setting, even when you were very young, we were being pushed out front. That is, we were asked to assume positions where we were actually being exposed to people. The other thing I remember vividly too was when we rehearsed, and a lot of rehearsal of special music was at our house. Of course, there was a quartet of you and Lloyd and Eva and Nellie, and you often sang. But one thing that my mother was very insistent upon was that if it was going to be done in church, it had to be done well. And if there was any thing that rankled her anymore, I don't know what it would be, than to hear someone say, after you've gone through something once, or perhaps twice, "Well, that's good enough." She said many times, "Oh, if it's going to be done in church, it should be done as well as you can possibly do it."
And she would not say that in a very commanding way, but in a rather quiet, gentle way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think our growing up together in the family was a rather unique situation. And I think in the community, the folks looked upon our family, us about 5, well 6 with Edwin. Edwin was married, and Edwin was a part of it too, with his violin, but they looked upon us as a rather solid unit. And it wasn't so much a matter of having to go outside the home to find our entertainment, but we did so many things together. Alvin has mentioned the mixed quartet that we had. Lloyd sang tenor, Nellie sang soprano, Eva sang alto, and I sang bass. And we had quite a number of songs, some of them rather secular, and a number of religious songs that we sang. And then Alvin came along playing his guitar and playing the mouth organ and singing, and Lloyd playing the harmonica. And so he and Lloyd would get together. So we had a number of things that we could do, and we were invited to put on programs at PTAs and Farm Bureau meetings and a number of occasions.
Yeah, I'm still called upon, and especially at Christmas time, to lead Christmas carols with my guitar. And I get quite a kick out of that, because actually it's the same guitar that I pulled out of the box at Edwin's house when I was 11 years old. It's the old Sears Supertone guitar. So I tell people that this was my Christmas present when I was 11 years old, and I said, you know, it's really held up very well for having 40 years of use. And they say, oh, yes. And then some critic will say, well, are you sure that it was certainly more than 40 years, wasn't it? And then I have to admit that indeed it was.
And then we did some instrumental, but nevertheless, we had a lot of fun at it.
We were the best around.
Edwin would play the violin, and we'd gotten hold of an old cello that I'd pluck away at. I never could play a cello, but then or sometimes
you could provide bass.
Sometimes I'd play clarinet, which I played in high school, and Alvin and Lloyd had played their harmonica, and
I played the guitar, and Eva.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And Eva chord on the piano.
Piano, or Nellie.
Or Nellie, yeah.
And so we had an instrumental group.
Edwin and Evelyn and Paul would come out often late Sunday afternoon, and we'd have dinner together, and after chores were done, then we'd go out, go into the front room, which is then the parlor, and I remember, we'll always remember our mother sitting there just eating that up as we played. She just, she had a look of contentment on her face about that whole thing.
And I don't know how much satisfaction we gave others, but I think all of it was a tremendous value to us as a family.
Oh yeah, it was a very cohesive kind of experience, and that was something too that kind of was motivating to us then as we moved out into the world. Yeah, well, the other thing I was very young, of course, back in the days when Brother Sharp used to do his orations. The experience of having a blind minister, and very anti-Catholic and anti quite a lot. But he was quite an orator, and that was. It's been interesting to me in our church here in Indianapolis. For a couple of years, we had one of his great granddaughters, Harriet Hamer, and she enjoyed my getting her in touch with, talking about her early family. That is, her forebears, the ones that we've known in Iowa, Maud Schmullick and Angeline Trelaw and that whole troop. She always said that she learned more about her family by talking to me than any other way.
Yes, I still remember his preaching. While in many regards it was rather dogmatic, yet he also had a lot of very good logic and very good sense about it. And I remember, I don't know why I remember, but I remember his being there by them across the street.
It's a brilliant troop.